Hello, everyone. My name is Molly Halsey, and I'm the event specialist here at Enterprise DB. I will be your host today for our webinar, My Favorite PostgreSQL Books. I'm joined by Mark Linster, EDB's SVP of Product Development, and Bruce Momgen, co-founder of the Postgres Global Development Group and database architect. Now, to go through a few housekeeping items before we jump in. This presentation is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording along with the slides after the broadcast. The lines are currently muted. If you have a question, please feel free to submit it in the question panel. We expect the presentation to last around 45 minutes today, and we will allot any extra time for as many questions as possible.
Okay, so this is part of a webinar series. The last couple were about, the PostgreSQL.conf file and how you can use it to tune stuff. Then Devram Gunduz gave us a presentation about native packaging and why that's a much better choice for installations. And 2 weeks ago, Bruce gave a really interesting presentation on the window functions in Postgres. Today we'll talk about my favorite Postgres books, and then in 2 weeks we'll talk about DBA techniques, especially what we do in our remote DBA organization for Postgres. All of these things are recorded, available on our website, and if you can't find the link for some reason, just pop something into the question channel and Molly will point you in the right direction.
Mark, did we just change the May date, or was that another thing we changed yesterday?
No, I thought that was, what did we change?
We got a request to change one of the dates of the webinar.
Oh no, that's on the 27th. So the day on the 27th got moved, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then also, for anybody who's got questions about Postgres, I know here you can ask questions in the Q&A, but anybody who's got questions about Postgres or wants to discuss something live about Postgres, we host the Postgres Pulse live session every Monday. So that's at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, 4 in the afternoon in the UK, or in Europe, Central Europe at 5 in the evening. Join us, dial in. Bruce Vibor, Josh Taylor, a developer advocate, and sometimes a guest, will be taking questions there. I think next week, Bruce, correct me if I'm wrong, I think next week is about explain and analyze. Is that correct?
Yeah, in fact, we just got a new title to that one. It looks pretty interesting. I do recommend people check it out. It's kind of a very freewheeling kind of a topic and presentation that you don't see a lot. We're trying to make it interesting and attractive to people. So I think they're coming along really well, and I'm enjoying doing them. I don't know about you, Mark. You weren't at the last one though. You were. No,
it wasn't. So
hopefully you'll be back. So it was a lot of fun. We missed you. We did.
Yeah, it's a really good live event. So let me dive into what we're going to do today. I have a quick preamble where I'm just going to talk about, from my perspective, what am I looking for in a Postgres book and why we having this session today. I'll give you the quick, too long, didn't read. So if somebody gets bored quickly, just stay for the second that second slide, and you'll get all the detail. And then we'll talk through 4 books. So one is an in-depth introduction, another one is a cookbook, a third one is a deep dive that's really focused on the Postgres expert, and then a book focused on the developer, the person who wants to develop new applications with Postgres. Okay. So preamble here first. This is all based on what I've been doing in now over 7 years here at EDB, working with customers, partners, and employees. I personally am not so fond of what I often see, I call it Google and Go, which is, just kind of collecting the absolute minimum knowledge that is required to solve a specific task. I think Bruce and I were both of the opinion that databases, and especially DBAs, really benefit if they have a foundational understanding, not just how to do the task, not just what we often see with customers where a DBA will say, yeah, but every Friday I do this, and then the phone doesn't ring over the weekend. So they're very worried if they can't do this. because that's always what they've been doing. They don't necessarily understand why they're doing it, but when they got into the job, they were told, do this, and you'll be okay. We want DBAs. We want our customers, partners, employees to have a bit more of a fundamental understanding.
I mean, yeah, there's just so many features here and so much available that people probably don't know about. That's, I think, the biggest loss is somebody coming, not knowing, using another database, assuming Postgres has the same feature set and not more, right? And just continuing to do the same thing, or maybe having no experience in databases at all. We had an issue with Postgres Pulse last week where somebody was doing backups really in a way that wasn't the best option. But that's the way they've always done backups for file systems. So we're just going to use the same thing. There's just so much here. And it's a shame that it's not being used. And that's why the Google and Go thing, you don't see the breadth of options. You don't see the spectrum of what is possible.
Yeah.
And for something this complicated, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, and one of the books here will talk specifically about, some of the wow features of Postgres that, no other database has. But once you understand them, your amount of code and your amount of work really drops, but you have to understand those. If you just kind of do in Postgres what you did in, I don't know, SQL Server or MySQL, well, you will get limited advantage. Okay, and then traditionally, we worked with infrastructure DBAs. When I started here, most questions were about how to install, a little bit how to tune. Now the world has changed today, and there's an interesting blog and about that. We see Postgres everywhere. Postgres today is available in every cloud, every deployment platform. There's lots of vendors that support it. So you can really use Postgres without fearing lock-in. And the great thing about that is you can now start using Postgres features, right? Which you wouldn't do traditionally. You'd stay at the ORB level or the standard SQL level. But now developers can really start digging into Postgres and start using stuff that's only available in Postgres, but they still do not have to worry about any kind of lock-in. And we see developers driving adoption. So with all respect, Steve Ballmer was right when he said developers rule. Second thing is, we're seeing enormously growing adoption, and many people have seen this slide here, but it's just fantastic how Postgres has picked up in the last, 7 years. So the interest is growing really, really rapidly. And as you know, we work with many people coming from Oracle. And so the question is always, hey, I know Oracle, I know SQL Server, or I'm an architect, I've worked with apps that had a persistent data store. How do I get into Postgres, right? And that's part of what we're trying to do here, give people hands-on practical advice for, how to do this and how to do it well. One of the key things is I have not found the one book that covers everything. Okay, so that's why there's 4 books here that I believe, depending on what you're trying to do, you should be considerate. Now, one really, really important thing here. These are my recommended books, okay? I am not claiming that I read every available Postgres book on the market. I'm sure there are many other ones available. I have read more than just these 4, but I'm not claiming that these are the best. They are just my recommended books, okay? And then the other thing is, I learn from books, but that's just me. Your mileage may vary. There's going to be a number of screenshots that authors have made available to me, authors and publishers. So thank them for their contribution, and all that is shown with permission from the authors. Okay, so long time ago.
There we go.
Yeah.
I think one thing we have to bring out here, and this is putting some of our bias in here, is there's different types of learners, right? There are learners who really approach things from a conceptual standpoint and want to understand the broad spectrum of what's available before they dive in. You and I are more that style. There are other people who really don't learn that way. They get bored quickly, and they want to jump to an example. They want to have hands-on stuff right away. And those people, are different books are going to attract those people, or they may not even use books at all because it's just not the way they learn. I think that's the most efficient way, frankly, but that's not for everybody. So that's why there are so many different books, I think, because you have people who want to learn more of a hands-on, more concept-oriented, more big picture. They're all different styles.
Yep, exactly. So when I got into Postgres, this was my first Postgres book, right? Now that's dates from 2001. I think, Bruce, that was Postgres 7. So the book is slightly out of date. You can only get it used today, as far as I know. But lots of things have changed in 20 years. And one thing was also at that time, when you went to a bookstore, you know, they existed at that time, you found lots of Oracle and SQL Server books, Postgres books, not so much. Today, the virtual shelves and the new virtual bookstores are filled with Postgres books. There's a lot of them coming out, and that's why we wanted to do this.
And I think we can also mention that the Postgres manuals are certainly an excellent resource as well.
Absolutely.
Clocking it at over 3,000 pages.
Yeah.
It is an exhaustive explanation of how to use Postgres, every flag, every option, every facility in detail. But at 3,000 pages, it's really daunting. And it really is more of a reference. It doesn't a lot of times really sit back and say, why would you want to use this feature? How does this feature fit in with other features? What's the architecture? And we've been criticized for that, actually, as a project, that the manuals are great reference, but not great learning tools. And I'm hopeful that these books kind of fill in that. We've really never felt the manual could be that, but we encourage books to fill in that piece of helping people understand the concepts around the database and where all those features fit in.
Yeah. The manual is really encyclopedic. You know, and the books here will be much more of a how do I get started? How do I do specific things? I'm a developer. How should
I use this feature? How does it work in writing applications? When would I want to use this? Yeah.
Okay. So the summary here is you know, there's 4 perspectives on Postgres I'm going to take. Is how I want to get started with Postgres. Well, the recommendation that I have here is Regina and Leo's book. This is the 2nd edition. I'm going to talk about the 3rd edition, which is Get PostgreSQL Up and Running. I think that's a very interesting book for somebody who wants to get started, seriously started with Postgres. It's very approachable. It's only like 270 pages. And it's a very good 1, 2, 3 type of approach. If somebody wants to understand more of how it works and what happens under the hood, right, then Mastering Postgres 12 from Hans-Jürgen Schöning is what I would recommend. That's also has been updated for version 12, but that's not an easy start. The learning curve is very steep, and I'll walk you through that a little bit too. If somebody is in need of a good how-to cookbook, so you're a DBA, you're thrown into a task, and you really want to know, I want to have a reference for how to do very specific things. Simon and his team are presenting about 175 recipes, easily understandable, really cover a wide breadth. So that's where I would go then. If you're a developer, right, who wants to write less code and write really good code and take advantage of Postgres, and that's something that I find very, very interesting. Now that Postgres is available on every cloud, on every platform, and you can choose from a plethora of vendors that support it, this is really a book that I would highly recommend, because it cuts down on the amount of code that you need to write as an application developer, and helps you balance much better between what do I do in the app, what do I do in the database, and why. So I think that's probably the most wow book of the 3 that I read. But again, if you're new, start with Regina and Leo's book. You know, if you really want to dive deep, Hans-Jürgen is great. If you're a DBA, Simon's book is where I would go. And if you really want to write smart code and write as little as possible, but create a fast app and get to market fast, I think Dimitri's book is very interesting.
And they do illustrate the learning styles, right? I mean, the first one, very hands-on, getting up and started. You know, I know all these people, they all do great work. The third book, a very cookbook. Obviously, there were cookbooks in the description, right? So it's not really going to talk about concepts. It's going to say, I want to do X. What are my options, right? For the second and fourth book, obviously, much more philosophical, you know, in trying to understand Hans Jurgensen really going into incredible detail of the internals and how all the pieces work together. And Dimitri more focused on I'm a developer. I want to get the best use out of this, but I need to understand how to use those in that context.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
Yeah, and before I dive deeper here in discussions with Bruce, I had to acknowledge that doing this webinar was probably one of the stupidest things I've done this year, because this is like an enormous amount of work. I thought this was easy, you know, read a dozen books, make a recommendation, but you know, this was not one of the smart self-assigned tasks. So.
It's like, you know, it's like you're at a newspaper and somebody says, we need to write an article about mountain climbing. And the one guy says, oh, I'll do it. You know, you're not realizing that he's got to climb a mountain to learn how to do this, right? And everyone else is like, oh, okay, you go ahead, right? So yeah, I saw this title, I was like, I know that's a big ask to really dig in. But I think we talked about this before, Mark. I mean, it really is hard. Every time I have to learn something new, it's really hard. And I'm spending hours and hours and hours researching things. And I'm thinking, this is a waste. Is this a good use of my time? Am I going to use this information? This is the problem with conceptual learning, right? You're not doing anything. You're just, all these concepts are coming in and you're not really producing anything during this, right?
Yeah.
But then 6 months later, a year later, 18 months later, you look back and you say, what a great investment of time, right? Because now I understand how all the Postgres stuff works, or how all the security pieces work together, and I can actually speak intelligently and know that I actually understand the topic fully. And you know, that's how you become an expert, right? Not really by bouncing around from topic to topic, stopping and spending that time. So I'll be interested to ask you maybe in 6 months or a year how you look back at the time you spent reading these books.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let me dive into the first one here. Regina and Leo's book, as I said before, it's a great introduction to PostgreSQL. The authors are very well known and respected in the Postgres and PostGIS worlds. I think they also have a very interesting book about PostGIS. The book's very approachable, and for me, that's important because, you know, getting into new tech can sometimes be a little overwhelming, and they do a very good job at that. They focus on the essential, but they're not. This is not like Postgres for Dummies, right? It's not an exhaustive list of everything, but it's everything that you need to get started. At least that's my view. And something that I really liked about what they did is they point to a lot of outside resources. Many of them are well known again in the Postgres community. For example, Depeche.com, very interesting site. So I applaud the authors for having done that, because they're not just hawking their own stuff, which some people do, but they really introduce the reader to the wealth of what's available. It's 275 very well written pages. We give you the kind of table of content here. Gives you an idea for how they approach that, and you can see very quickly they go into installing, configuring, and then you know, getting you up and running. I like the level of detail that they use for you know, for getting started. What I really liked was the way they approach Psql, which for those that don't know it, is the standard command line interface for Postgres that can be used interactively or in a batch mode. And they do a very good job of introducing those commands. It's nice to see a book that has an exhaustive list of those commands in there. They actually flag those that were like more recently introduced, which is also interesting. So if you used to work with Postgres a while ago and now get into it, this is a good roadmap to just quickly see what's new. They don't just list the things, but then they use Psql, the command line interface, to create a little nice HTML report. They give you the whole source code, and this report is actually a really nice dashboard-like report for any database, right? So any Postgres database. So this code can be used again and again and again to get a quick view. Hey, what's going on with my database? Where are my files? What are my settings, etc. So it's a nice example. Again, very approachable. This is not pages and pages of code, but when you look at this, you can see that, oh, wow, I can do more with Psql than just run a select query. I can actually do something really cool with it. This is a good quote showing, how they're approaching it. They're telling you that, hey, they'll give you enough information to get up and running and guide you to find more important things and stay away from the landmines. So this is not an exhaustive book, couldn't do that on 275 pages, but it's a very approachable book. It's also very well edited. Okay, let me look at the next one here. Mastering Postgres 12 from Hans-Jürgen Schönig from Cybertech in Austria. This is really not for the Postgres novice. He's a master Postgres user, and he really dives into tuning, debugging, and making hard things work. The learning curve in this book is really steep. So I would definitely say, hey, use Regina and Leo's book first before you dive into this. Have some hands-on experience with Postgres before you dive in. Because, for example, just on page 33, so you've barely warmed up, you've barely gone through the table of content, he goes into understanding the details of transaction isolation levels, which is important, but for a novice, that may be a little steep to do that just on page 33, to go into the eye of asset. Good explanation of key concepts, also dives into advanced things like operator classes. And those are the exciting things about Postgres, right? So once you get into that, you can really see that, oh, with Postgres, I can do things that I can't do with any other database, and I can do them with less code, and it's really elegant, okay? So that's really a book for the more advanced user. If you really want to dive into deeper into the concepts, it's 427 pages, loaded with good stuff. You can see on the table of content already, how fast he dives into advanced concepts. You can see on page 33 the transaction isolation levels, and then deadlocks, and etc. So it's this is a bit dense, but it's good because, as Bruce was saying, both Bruce and I, we believe that having a sound understanding for how the database works actually makes working with a database a lot easier, right? Then here's the example where he goes into the different transaction isolation levels, and again, it's approachable, right? So he explains it very well. Has one example that shows what happens in read committed and repeatable read, where the differences are, what the different results are, and when you should be using what. Other things very well put together, let's say like auto vacuum threshold. For those of you that have worked with Postgres, that's a big issue. But it's not just the auto vacuum threshold that he talks about, but also the auto vacuum analyze threshold, right? Which is the place where, how much dirty stuff or how much bloat do you have before the analyzer actually redoes the statistics. Okay, so again, it's kind of useful and well put together. And when he goes into indexes, then it's probably the best explanation that I've seen of how the gist index works and why gist index is so interesting, right? So here with a picture like that, he shows what you can do with gist and why gist is so interesting for geometric indexes that don't just talk about next and prior, but also about all kinds of overlaps, fuzzy searching, etc. So again, really interesting book.
Yeah, that's really cool that he did that. I mean, that's
yeah,
I mean, that's great stuff. You're not going to start with
exactly. You know,
crazy,
like, this is on page 80, right? If this is your first book
yes,
about
you think it's
Postgres,
350 pages left to go.
yes. So, you know, if this is your first book about Postgres, I don't know. You may be much smarter than I am, but I would feel a little overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll admit I had to draw one of these when I wrote a presentation about indexing, and I didn't really understand what GIST did until I got this box concept kind of down, because we're always thinking in linear B tree mode, you know, as database people. And when you start to think of 2D spaces, right? It's just a different idea. And you're right, that you can't really make use of it, or you don't understand why it's useful until you get this picture. That kind of use is probably not going to be your initial start of the database. But again, great example of, if you're going to use the full feature set, it is really useful to understand how, you know, how 2D points fit in here, how sort of full text search and stuff all fits into this kind of idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and imagine what you would do in the application if you don't know that this is available in Postgres.
Right. Yeah.
How
you'd be
many
like, well,
lines of code would you write to do something like this? So it's important to know what's available, so you know how to choose the right tools.
right.
Okay. Okay, let me go to the next one here, which is Simon Riggs and team from Second Quadrant. Their cookbook. It's been updated for version 11 of Postgres. 175 recipes. Now, a recipe, they've done a very nice job of really saying, hey, what is it, right? What are we trying to do here? Like, I don't know, understand, like a naming strategy for tables and indexes, right? What do you need to do to get ready to start developing that naming strategy? How to do it. They have very good examples. Then specifically, this is how you do it. And then they say, hey, there's more. And in that case, and that there's more, they explain, you know, how to name the associated indexes. What's a good naming strategy, so that your namespace is actually going to hold up over time, because that happens so often. There, somebody may just say, hey, this table is called customer, this table is called products, this table is called things, and then indexes are just like index 1, 2, and 3. That works as long as you know, have a POC, but then it's not scalable. You're gonna have to start over from scratch. And here they have really nice recipes like that.
So you're saying this is a very practical book, right?
It's a very practical book, yes. It does not dive into a lot of what happens under the hood or behind the scenes. It's really focused on, you know, specifically how you do things. Like one example I think I'll show is if you're a DBA taking on a new database and you don't know much about it, right? What are the 20 things you should do to get the lay of the land? One of them is to understand, what are your biggest tables? Well, what would the novice DBA do to understand the size of a table? Well, select count star, right? Well, you know, if you got something with a gazillion rows that is heavily used, nobody is going to like the fact that you just ran select count star, right? So
they're terabyte table, right? Yeah.
Okay. So it's very practical. It's 600 pages. Again, yeah. If this is your first book, it may get you up and running really quickly, but it's a little light on the behind the scenes. Okay, but it's very practical. You can see that in the table of content here, where it's always following that same recipe, like in connecting to the PostgreSQL server, getting ready, how to do it, how it works. There's more, right? You know, if you're getting into exploring the database, how to do it, there's more. It's always the same approach. So it's very quick. It's a very quick way to to solve specific tasks.
So for learners who like that feedback right away, I just want to get X done, this would be a good book.
Correct. Yeah. So here, for example, in his sections or in their sections about exploring the database, right? You're handed a new task, right? You're a DBA and you're just getting a new project that somebody else developed. Well, here are, I can't remember, it's 18 or 20 steps as to this is what you do. And then for every step, he also tells you how to do it, right? And once you've done that, you actually have a good understanding of the lay of the land, instead of you having to sit there and say, okay, what should I really know about this database? I got 2 hours, right? So that makes it very approachable, right? Here is the example of, how many rows in the table, right? Select count, well, that's what I would have done. But I gave select count with a IoT table that has a gazillion rows in it, and lots of stuff going on it. Well, nobody would have liked it. So he's saying, hey, but the planner, the Postgres planner, has a way to do it, to estimate it. Here's one way of doing it. He's got 2 more pieces of code that do that same thing. So there's no locks on this table when he does that. He doesn't actually really access the table itself. Okay, it's a pretty smart way of doing it. How to deal with it.
And you don't need the exact answer, right? You're just, if it's 1 billion or 2 billion, you want just,
yeah.
You don't need to add to the number what it is. You just need a ballpark number. Much easier to do it. Yeah.
Right. So this is, I think, a good representation, a good picture of the kind of things that that you'll find in this book. Okay. The last one here, The Art of PostgreSQL. It's a fairly new book by Dimitri Fontaine from Microsoft. It's a book you can't get it on Amazon. You have to Google it and I think order it directly from Dimitri. It comes in PDF format. I actually have this format. Is actually called the Dead Tree format. It's a book definitely for the developer. Lots of downloadable code, samples, and exercises. If you're a developer and you can start with this book if you're a developer, but make sure that you have somebody in your team who, make sure that you have Postgres ready and can work with it, right? Whether you get it on the cloud or somebody in the team installs it for you, because I don't think Dimitri spends any time with any of that stuff. It's assumed that you can get to the Postgres prompt. So the subtitle really gives away what this book is all about. Turn thousands of lines of code into simple queries. And he does a very good job of showing exactly that, the power of Postgres. And I believe that's one of the timeliest books right now, because I believe that now that Postgres is available everywhere, on Google, on Amazon, on Azure, on VMware, on your laptop, everywhere, right? And now that you have lots of companies that you can work with to get a supported version of Postgres, or you support your own, whatever, right? So at this point in time, you do not have to worry about vendor lock-in anymore, or platform lock-in. You could just dive into Postgres. And that's, I think, what Dimitri really encourages people to do, to go in and take advantage of the stuff that's in Postgres to write significantly less code. Much of his philosophy cuts against the grain of what's been lately done in application development, where many architects pulled all the business logic into the application layer. Dimitri encourages to reconsider that, because it has significant potential disadvantages, and you often do write a lot more code. So I think it's, as I said, a very timely book, very interesting. So table of content again, you can see here relatively quickly, he's diving into writing SQL queries, but not just as how to write queries efficiently. There's other Martin, can't remember his last name now, that have great books about how to write really efficient SQL, but he really dives into what happens if you don't balance the logic in the application server and into the database correctly. And that's where it goes into the concerns about correctness and efficiency. What happens if you don't understand the value of the snapshot and the value of the I, again, in asset, right? He dives into that fairly quickly. So that already comes in on page 33, okay? There's a recurring theme in the book. These are my words. It's really encouraging us to balance the business logic between the application and the database. Take advantage of stored procedures, database snapshots, advanced data types and extensions. That doesn't mean, he doesn't say, I'm not saying do everything in stored procedures, but these are a good abstraction layer that creates much, much more efficient code, reduces the amount of code, and really leverages the things that are available in the relational database. And at the end of the day, I am convinced that developers will get it done faster. The code will be significantly more performant because you have a lot less I/O going back and forth from the application to the database. You do a lot more operations close to the data, and you write a lot less code because Postgres got a really boatload of very, very good features in it that should be used. So there's great code samples in there, very, very good code samples, not just SQL code samples. So almost everybody else is limiting themselves to queries and stored procedures. What he's really showing is to say, hey, if I did this in Python, this is what it looks like. And I think his Python code is good, not artificially bloated or anything like that. And says, okay, now I'm doing the same thing here in inside the database. And then I'll walk you through the advantages and disadvantages, right? What happens when you materialize your objects in Python and then you do calculations? Well, this is the advantage, disadvantage of the network traffic. This is what happened to your database transactional consistency, okay? So for many developers who's traditionally used databases for persistence only, this might be a good wake-up call because there may often be better ways of doing it, better in terms of efficiency, but also in terms of correctness.
Yeah, I mean, this has been an age-old argument of, do you do it in the application? Do you do it in the database? What's the lock-in issue? Can you scale the database as easily as you can scale the clients? What do your application programmers know? What if I need to change databases because the database isn't performing as well? This is just it's a huge thing, but you're kind of right. Postgres comes in with so much that it really kind of tilts the discussion more. And I think this is what I'm seeing from this thing, that there's just so much in Postgres, the languages, the data types, the indexing methods, where, nearest neighbor search stuff that just really starts to tilt what you used to kind of want to keep at arm's length, and that is the database and those facilities which are either buggy or lock-in or whatever. And it's sort of this siren song of there's now so much there that I see him sort of trying to reevaluate putting more stuff into the database.
Yeah, and at the same time is Postgres is now everywhere, and you can self-support. You can go to Enterprise DB to get our support. You can go to Second Quadrant. You can go to some small Postgres shop, whatever. So you can start really diving into it, and you're not locked into a platform, and you're not locked into a vendor. And those two things coming together, that's, I think,
big
really
change,
empowering users, right?
Yeah, that's a big change. We talked about this before, that it feels like when you're dealing with commercial vendors, the more you're locked in, the more they exploit you, right?
Yeah.
But with Postgres, this kind of behavior doesn't exist. So that kind of part of the argument it doesn't play as strongly, and therefore pushing stuff into the database, and I'm sure he's done a wonderful job, is really an interesting story.
Yes, it is. Okay. So in summarizing things, one more thing that he is also, which is, I mean, along the lines of what Leo and Regina have done, Dimitri has a number of really interesting interviews with leaders in this field. So again, the book and the concepts were not developed in isolation. And these, I mean, Marcus Reenand is for anybody who develops queries, Gregoire for anybody who works with PHP and the DOM model. For those of you that enjoy post about JSON, JSONB, Alvaro has just posted a number of things together with Stonebreaker on our website about the capabilities and advantages of JSONB with Postgres. So those are all big names. Craig Kirstens from Citus Data. So again, this book is about technique, but also about philosophy, and these interviews add a lot of color to that. Okay, so in summary, it's 4 books. I can't tell you just pick up one. If you're relatively new to it, I would start with Regina and Leo's book. But then after that, you go where where the wind blows you, or where where your professional demands or your personal interest goes. I think all of these books are things that are absolutely worth reading. Or if you're crazy about books like me, get them all. That creates a really good foundation.
Yeah, I'm looking. I have the first and last ones, but I don't have the 2 middle ones. And I'm thinking, gee, maybe I should just get them just so I can flip through to see if there's things that are explained clearer or ideas that would get me thinking of new ideas. So maybe I'll take.
Yeah, I must say, and Hans-Jürgen's book about the operator framework, and some of the descriptions in there about custom data types is just something that there's a wow element there that we need to push more, because it's really about elevating concepts and programming at a conceptual level that in other databases is not possible.
Yeah, but this is something we've learned from from looking at, for example, Informix and how the problems they had marketing Universal Server back in the 90s, that if you position yourself just as a next generation database, people who want to migrate from their old database will overlook you. So you've always got this this balancing act of saying we are a fully functional relational database for people who are coming in from other markets, and then once they're here, helping them to explain how Postgres is so much of a superset of what they had before. And that kind of messaging has always been hard for us. So exactly that whole data type operator thing is something you never lead with, but once people are comfortable with the feature set, you start to show them how much more is available.
Yep. Okay. So I will touch briefly just on who Enterprise DB is, and promise won't take more than 2 minutes before we go into questions, because I think there's a number of questions that are piling up. So basically, we've been in the in the Postgres space for a long time, since about 2004, shipping products since 2006. Today, EDB Postgres, which is really Postgres with Oracle compatibility, has been in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for 7 years. So we have the tooling, the expertise, and the worldwide team to help a lot of our customers be very successful in this space here. And if anybody wants a copy of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, just put it into the chat dialogue, and we'll send you a copy. Then, lots of customers, obviously, and lots of large customers, lots of big names, and they don't just use Postgres for small things. Many of them use Postgres for very, very advanced applications, and increasingly what we call, tier 1 applications, so mission critical applications. But now more and more we see also apps that have to be extremely responsive not just in terms of TPS and latency, but responsive in terms of being able to change quickly with the market. many open source contributors today in the team. So Bruce obviously has been leading the core team for a long time. Dave Page, you know, of PG admin fame, Robert and the MIT, you know, significant code contributors. Devram did the webinar with him a couple of weeks ago here about native packaging, but then also others that that are actively contributing to Postgres and the JSON communities. If you have any worries about, you know, the use of Postgres today, get in touch with us, because we don't just, you know, ship Postgres, we also help people actively manage their own Postgres. And then now we're going to get into questions, but if you have more questions, as I said before, every Monday you can dial in at 11, and then you know, in, well, 2 months we will have Postgres Vision. This time it's going to be virtual. We already have a large number of people signed up, and I think it's going to be a really, really interesting event. So Molly, let's tell us, what questions do we have?
Mark, before we go to that, I just want to mention that we do have some, again, because of the virus, we have a bunch of online events available to people. If you go to my website, momgen.us, under events, we have a New York City meetup, of course, online, May 6th, Percona Live, May 19-20, PGCon, which is the big basic community development conference, May 26 to 29, and of course Postgres Vision, which is free this year, which is great, as you can see from the slide, June 23-24. So, and also talking yesterday, this virtual event is going to be in all time zones. So Postgres Vision will have a European time zone slot. It will have an Asia time zone slot as well. It's not going to be, I think Percona is doing a 24-hour span. We're not doing that. I think we're saying we have North America times, and then a batch of talks in the European time zone and a batch of talks in Asia time zone. So I said, it should be a really interesting event. And again, because you're probably stuck not traveling, these events are available. I haven't done too many virtual events yet, so we'll see how it goes, but I'm excited to try it.
Definitely, we're looking forward to it. So we have time for a couple of questions today. The first one that came in was, when it comes to PostgreSQL 12, are any of the books directly applicable? Are the concepts close enough that you can still learn and apply them to PostgreSQL 12?
I would say so, yes. I mean, Regina and Leo's book is, I think, updated for Postgres 10. So, but I wouldn't hesitate, because conceptually, Postgres 10 and 12 is very, very similar. There are some new features, but you know, you pick those up from the release notes. You know, the other books, they have sections that basically highlight the updates, but conceptually the books are the same.
All right. Another question we had was, does Oracle compatibility in EDB Postgres change any of the advice in the books?
No, not really. I mean, there's additional capabilities there, but again, if you're looking at it from a conceptual point of view, conceptually locking transactions, you know, the indexing, all that stuff works the same way. You have some additional data types, some additional catalogs, and then obviously Oracle compatibility with PLSQL, etc. But no, conceptually it stays the same. You know, vacuum and bloat is the same. Yeah, the copy command has been supplemented with an EDB loader that is slightly, you know, has slightly different performance characteristics, a little faster, but no, conceptually, all the advice in this book is applicable.
All right, and then we have time for one more question. People want to know, are either of you part of a public Slack group where they could ask for advice?
Ooh, I'm not.
So there is a Postgres Slack channel. If you go to the Postgres website, there it's listed. There also is an IRC channel for those of you old as I am, which actually has a lot more activity. The Slack channel I am not on regularly, because I was on for a couple months and there wasn't nobody really asked me a question, so I stopped. But the RC channel actually is incredibly busy. If you go to the PG Life website, you can see it. We currently have 1,015 people in the RC channel, and there's a huge. But the Slack channel also has populated. I think there's maybe 400 or 500 last time I looked in the Slack channel. It doesn't have as much activity, but again, you should be very free to ask questions there as well.
All right, great. So that is all the time we have today for questions. Apologies to those whose questions we were unable to answer today. We will be posting those answers on the landing page that will be public in a few days. Thank you all for joining us for the webinar. We will be sharing the recording and the slides with you as soon as possible, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.